it's usually like a finally moment in your head when you see somebody that shares a similar interest as you do. You kind of, like, there's community to be found in the trenches of topics. In whatever you're interested in. If it's music, if it's philosophy, if it's math, if it's engineering, whatever your interests and passions are, it becomes lonely when you become maybe curious enough about something and maybe educated. So we'll stick with educated. If you're educated enough about something, it might become a bit lonely, but when you find others, you get a sense of community. When you have an outlet that you can bounce things off of and receive, it starts making you think of questions that you don't mind, because, you can only think of so much. You start having to answer questions that another curious individual is having about these things, and you can sit and say, oh, wow, I never thought about it like that. Or maybe they have a question and you understand something about it and you have to explain it to them. And as you explain it, you understand it even better. It's like...
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Denting. I'm your host, Fernando Andrade, and today we have another special episode with a special topic with a special friend, Tate Dolan. Welcome to Denting. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm good.
We're going to figure this out. Like I told you, this is like the same thing we do every single Friday morning when we go to Mezzo or whenever we talk. And we just let's record it.
Yeah.
See what happens.
Yeah.
We'll open a bottle of wine and we'll talk about today's topic is going to be, does education make us lonelier? And as you can see on the iPad there, I have a few bullet points on what I even mean by that, what the question even means.
Mm-hmm.
We'll give you context. So for me, something I've talked about with my dad, and I've mentioned my dad a lot to you, something I was talking about with him, especially over break, was just, is it the more educated we are, the less amount of people we can talk to? And it sounds like a douchebag thing to say, but, when you genuinely think about it, is it true? Because, your taste starts to change and, what you're interested in and all these things, and it's how many people are into the same amount of things I'm into?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot changes with education. For example, once I came here, I started getting into philosophy and history and a bit of sociology, and not deeply, but I'll read books about it, and rarely can I talk with people about this because people couldn't give a fuck about these topics, right? And something I'd mention is well, why don't these people care? And what's the basis of a friendship, or what makes us lonely?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's the different definitions of the typical you're just alone but you're not lonely. I feel lonely is when you don't have anybody to talk about things with or experience things with or share your same interests with. And I think friendship is based off of being able to share experiences and have the same interests or same tastes or whatever. And that changes with time, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But that's basically what I wanted to talk about with today, if that's okay with you.
I mean, it all sounds good to me, yeah.
Have you experienced anything similar to that, with not necessarily education, but just experiences and tastes, how it makes you lonely to a certain extent?
Yeah. I think in my life, a clear example is music. My entire life I've been super into music, into different instruments. I play a few instruments. My dad was a musician as I was born, and for the first few years of my life as I was kind of raised on it. And I have a really deep interest and passion for a lot of music, and so I listen to a lot of music. I've always listened to a lot of different music than a lot of my friends listen to, and sometimes I'm sitting there listening to this music and I want to rant about how good this guitarist is or how good the drummer of this band Tool is, and everyone's like, "The fuck is Tool?" It's tough to find the connection sometimes, especially when you're really passionate about something and you just want to, engage with people who share that same interest. It's tough, and it feels lonely sometimes for a brief moment when you're, because you're in it and you're listening to it, and maybe there's part of the song that you love and you're like, and then the song finishes and I'm like, damn, I wish I could just talk to this about somebody, just rant about, this thing that this drummer does that I'm just fascinated by and I could never do. That's an easy example in my life, at least.
The first time I actually experienced that was with Jimmel and Dimmel. Shout out to the Himmel scenes. But they told me that they were just once talking about me and my interests, especially like as I go into journalism, and how like they were just saying like the thing that makes me different with this is how passionate I am about this and how unpassionate some other people are. And I feel like it's the same thing with music. Like as I've gotten to know you, like honestly more because we were friends, but we weren't like as close as senior year.
Yeah,
very different. Especially like as housemates, but always teammates. But still, like you being into music and the guitar and things like that. I've told you this. Like I don't have the same interest in music as you do. I couldn't care about music the same way you do, or you couldn't care about like certain content creators like I do. But seeing someone be passionate about something just like changes things, and I feel like that's something even with the education topic, like something that I talked about with Jimmel. And Jimmel, I mean, out of respect, is Jake Himmelstein. But something I've like talked about with him, and something I've noticed about him is like how passionate he is about certain topics. And it's not that you have to agree with him or be passionate about the same things, but just having a passion for something even creates some sort of connection. With that being said, when I say like, does education make us lonelier? It's also like being unpassionate about things. And I feel like we're on this trend with society about like just being more uneducated every time and more unpassionate about things and just falling into the same rhythm and circle over and over and over again in society. And I feel like it's more and more everyday now because of social media. And I'm not pulling this out of my ass. Like we have articles here that we're going to reference. And actually, I need to start screen recording this so that it's easier on me once I'm editing.
Yeah.
But there we go. But yeah, there's like plenty of things I want to cite. And like I said, we started with asking the question of, does education makes us lonelier in that way? And I think it's the same thing with passion. You experienced that with music, but something I feel like we've experienced as well is when we fall out of passion or when we take new steps in our life. And that's happened in every stage of our life. I feel like we've talked about this plenty of times. It happened to me in middle school because I attended the same school, kindergarten through 8th grade. So as soon as I left there, new groups of friends because I didn't have the same interests as some kids, or we were on the same grind in the sense that, well, these kids were going out Friday, Saturday, and hanging out after school, and we just could not. Like the next morning, we had a game in the morning, and it was just different friends groups. And then after high school, it's like, oh, my friends are a bunch of D1 athletes, and it's like, that's who I'm with, and it just changes. But now we experience it like we're done with soccer, and our friendships change a lot as well. Like falling out of a passion. Have you experienced that with anything else besides soccer or not really?
Trying to think. I mean, I've always throughout my life picked up things, you know, and sometimes they'll be briefer than others, but I'll get really interested in something. Like sometimes every night before I go to bed, I'll like watch a YouTube video about some math professor at MIT solving some weird problem in number theory. It's like, I don't really know too much about number theory, but it's interesting to me. And I'll sit there and I'll, you know, listen to people talk about, you know, chess theory. I'm into chess recently, so I've been playing a lot of chess, and, you know, there's stuff like that. And in seasons of my life, more things are more important than others. And I feel like I'm always, and I feel like you might too, I'm always kind of realigning my priorities. And I think when I'm in the process of realigning my priorities, I kind of fall in love and out of love with some of my passions.
I think the issue with that is like the people we're surrounded by when we're in that phase of our lives. Like we've talked about a lot, like the context that is college or the context that was spring break. It's the same thing. Like the joke you always mention, right? Like it's not alcoholism if you're in college. But it's the same thing as any other comparison. Like if you see two people fighting in the street, you try and stop them, and that's not okay. But if you put a ring around them, then people are going to spectate and even pay-per-view for that thing. But same thing here. Like if you're out drinking so often, like, hey, he has an issue. That's alcoholism. If you're in college, oh, it's okay. And everything is under context. But there's friends for everything is the point I'm trying to make. There's friends for every type of context. Once the context changes, it's just weird how much can change. I was talking about this with my brother, and he just went to college, and your friends are naturally going to change because the circumstance changes. It's It's the same thing as a video. Like, if you think about what a video is, it's a bunch of pictures aligned that move together very, very quickly from one to another, and it makes you think that there's motion.
Mm-hmm.
The person you are in one frame doesn't have to be the same person you are at the end of the frame, and it's the same thing with any experience and any passion. At the beginning of the frame, I was in love with soccer. I wanted to be a professional soccer player. By the end of the frame, by the end of college, I'm no longer looking at that, and I want nothing to know
Couldn't
about
wait to
soccer.
be done.
Couldn't wait to be done, man. And it's like, it's not anything against me. It's not anything against you or this game of soccer.
Mm-hmm.
The context just changes, and who you were in the first frame and the friends you had in the first frame doesn't have to be the same by the end. Like, you have no responsibility being the same person you were 5 minutes ago or having the same thoughts. Like, that's gonna change all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of what we're going through, and maybe I'm projecting myself, or we're projecting ourselves through this conversation with, like, this change make us lonelier, and this passion and education make us lonelier. But we'll dive deep into it and see what happens. I think it's a good time to open the
we could
the
go
bottle.
for that.
Yeah. We'll do that. Looking at it, while you open it up, I think something important, an important article to pull up, something I really like. I don't know if I've showed you this, actually. It's a Forbes article titled, "What Does It Mean to Be Educated?" Mm-hmm. Because actually, if we look up the actual definition of education on Google, let's see, education definition. What is going on? Let's see. Lovely.
Semi-successful.
There we go.
I was ready for me to just pull it out in the whole wide bottle all over the room.
That would have been a great clip. I don't know why it's not loading, but anyways, it's just asking like what education even is. Here we go. All right. It says, education is a noun, the process of receiving or giving systematic instruction, especially at a school or university. Another one is an enlightening experience. Education is a purposeful activity directed at achieving certain aims, such as transmitting knowledge or fostering skills and character traits. These aims may include the development of understanding, rationality, kindness, and honesty. I feel, though, like when we say, wow, that's a very educated person, or at least in Spanish, like when somebody says, like, él es muy educado, like he is very educated. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean like, wow, he has a degree.
Yeah.
It means more of like he knows how to handle himself, or he knows how to do X, Y, and Z well, and be like, I don't know, a good person socially or whatever. Like, what do you think when you hear like, oh, that's a very educated person, or like something like that?
When I think of the word educated, I think of like a tenured Princeton economics professor that wears, like a herringbone blazer and, sits next to a fireplace and reads a newspaper. Like, that's what I think about when I think of educated. It's like very well-rounded, I don't even know, has, degrees. You think degrees when you think educated. And there's a huge difference between degrees and educated and intelligent. Because you meet people that are very accomplished in the educational world, and you're thinking, I've met much more intelligent people that maybe go to schools that aren't as, quote, prestigious or some sort of comparison like that. And I think that's a really interesting distinction in my mind, is always like, I can think of people who I would classify as intelligent, and then I would classify others as just educated.
Educated is almost like if you're very good at history or math or something like that, but then there's intelligence where it's like understanding the why behind it and like the logic behind it, or like how things connected with history and how history can rhyme and things like that. And there is a huge distinction. Something that I'm thinking about right now is Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
We've talked about this. I actually did finish the movie recently. And I mean, that guy's like naturally brilliant. But I wouldn't consider him to be educated. Does he have a lot of knowledge? He really does, and he's read a lot of books, and I don't know if he was supposed to have a photographic memory. But like by the way he acts and goes about things, he doesn't seem to be very educated. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, he grew up in, Southie in Boston, came from a tough background, but, is sitting there's the scene of him sitting with the, MIT tenured professor going, this shit is easy to me. This is a fucking joke. I have to sit here and watch you fumble this around. And he's like this kid that probably didn't even finish high school.
Exactly. and there's a difference to that. And I think that's actually a great example with that movie. And to anybody that hasn't watched the movie, like you just described, as a kid with a tough background, he's a janitor at MIT and a very tenured professor, actually an award-winning professor, ends up putting problems out on the board like for anybody to solve. And he would solve them while no students could solve them. And then there's a scene at a bar in Harvard, and this like PhD student comes up and tries to school his friend, and he ends up schooling him. Like Will Hunting ends up schooling this random Harvard douchebag, pretty much.
Yeah. He's like, I read that book too. Did you have any thoughts about it yourself, or do you just want to recite it all?
Exactly. So there's like that difference between like plagiarizing the entire thing or being original. But I still think that with education, there's more to it. And it's really interesting, like here on the screen, what it says right here, that these aims may include development of understanding, rationality, kindness, and honesty. I've never considered it like that. I was actually, I don't know if it was something stupid like a TikTok or an actual article where it was explaining like the basis of how our education system is founded in the U.S. and how it leads to directly to jobs. I don't know if it was Rockefeller or one of those guys that like made a $127 million investment like way back in the day so that the system could look this way so that he could have more workers. Like how it was created for us to be more obedient and like know how to follow certain rules and be on time and know how to meet deadlines. Yeah. Which makes a lot of sense. There's these conspiracy theories out there, so I'm not gonna value it for that. But I mean, there's to a certain extent our education system, that's what it's doing. Like we're becoming obedient, we're becoming good at meeting deadlines and doing work and whatever. And sometimes we forget about sometimes we forget about actually learning.
Yeah. You're so obsessed with playing the game. School's you can treat school like a game, and if you know the rules well enough, you can do pretty well with you can play the game smarter and not harder and do as well as the kids that work a lot harder.
I mean, before this, I told you I was meeting with a guy that sold a really successful startup to Microsoft in the past few years, and he's doing really well and starting something else up. That may be mentioned here in the near future. We never know. But this guy, I was talking to him, and it's like, dude, you get to a certain point where if you have a 3.3 or a 4.0, you realize it doesn't make a difference once you're at UC Berkeley or in college in general. Like, if you have a 3, like when you before Berkeley, it's like, 4.0 is the standard, if not better. 4.5, 4.8, etc. Like, it's all these crazy GPAs. And then you get to Berkeley and you learn, wow, a 3.5 is a damn good GPA. A 3.3 is a good GPA. If you have a 3.8 or above, get a fucking life.
Yeah, you're almost looking at them like, all right, man. Like, what?
I don't know if it happens to you, but in classes, like, people will be like, well, what do I have to do to get an A? And it's like, dude, learn the subject. Like, I don't care if you get an A or a C or you fail. Like, just learn the subject and try to apply it to your life and take the best out of it. Like, to a certain extent, grades don't matter. That's a different conversation. Yeah. But to the point I'm trying to get to today, this Forbes article defines education in a way I really like it. There's this quote. It says, if you Google the question, one of the first responses that comes up is interesting, from Alfie Kahn. It says, quote, no one should offer pronouncements about what it means to be well educated without meeting my wife. Today, she is a practicing physician, and an excellent one at that, judging by feedback from her patients and colleagues. She will, however, freeze up if you ask her what 8 times 7 is, because she never learned the multiplication table. And forget about grammar or literature. After a dozen years, I continue to be impressed on a regular basis by the agility of her mind as well as by how much she doesn't know. End quote. And this leads to a list of definitions, right? That's down here of what it means to be educated. To develop the intellect, presumably including linguistic, mathematical, and analytical capabilities. To produce component, caring, loving, and lovable people. To create and sustain a democratic society. to invest in producing future workers for the workforce and ultimately corporate profits, which is exactly what we were talking about right now. But by the end of it, let's see if I can find it, or if it's at the very top, actually. Yeah, there we go. In recent posts, I have been suggesting that being educated includes a demonstrated ability to listen carefully, to think critically, to evaluate facts rigorously, to reason analytically, to imagine creatively, to articulate interesting questions, to explore alternative viewpoints, etc. I really think that that this isn't really happening today. And this applies to the passions that we were talking about. This is a point I wanted to get across of what it even means to be educated and how we go about that. And I mean, we see it a lot, whether it's with us and we catch ourselves doing it or seeing it in others, of how social media is making us stupid. And that's going to be a point for something later. But when you don't take interest in becoming more educated or learning more in whatever it is that you're interested in. I'm not talking about, philosophy and history
not one
and
specific
math.
thing.
No, I'm talking about if you're interested in a guitar, learn as much as you can about the guitar. If you're interested in a sport, learn as much as you can about the sport. But I don't think we're really doing that today. And to a certain extent, I think that's what's making us lonelier. Because many people can argue, social media is separating us because it's just making us gain social anxiety and we don't communicate in real life. But it's like, what are you going to talk about in real life? And why aren't we doing this?
Yeah. I think in a sense also, kind of going on the point of loneliness, I think a big part of especially college education. I think college education is a different topic and a different beast, especially than elementary, middle, high school, very standardized. You can get a very different experience at different universities, I think much different. I mean, it exists within, maybe say a private versus public high school, something like that.
Yeah.
There are going to be differences. I think they're less than they are in college, and especially when you look at what major you want to do. Everyone has to take history in elementary school, in high school, but not everybody has to take, computer science 189 or philosophy 121, or I don't know what those classes are, but, and so I think in college, how I think about what education is, or what it should be at least, is you're building problem solving skills. In whatever you do, you're building an intuition on how to solve very difficult problems. And I think that is, if you go deep enough and you care enough about it, that is what can start to make you lonely. Because if you get a strong enough intuition on how to solve difficult problems, you start to recognize a whole lot more problems. And you start seeing them play out in life. And then you start thinking about them, and you start thinking about, how would you even approach solving something like this? Because that's the whole gist of what we're doing right now, right? In all your classes, you have an essay, and you're like, all right, let's talk about this difficult topic. How are you gonna solve this? You essentially, when you get an essay prompt or a math question, you're saying, hey, can you solve this for me? Can you give me an answer? That's really all it is, and it's difficult and. But I think it makes us lonely because I think we sit and you start to see more problems play out, and you start to, I don't know, it just kind of takes over your mind a little bit.
It's kind of crazy because when I came up with this question and this topic, I didn't realize that it kind of intertwines maybe with how society perceives nerds and how they're antisocial and this and that. But I think the reason that education makes us so lonely is because the more let's start over. The more you know, the more you realize how little you know. The more you learn, the more you realize how much left you have to learn and how much you really don't know. I think that could be the case, and maybe that's why society thinks nerdy and geeky people just are antisocial or weird.
Yeah.
Because they can't connect with the same passions and interests as other people. Something that happened to me quite recently was, I'm a political science major. Dude, I stopped caring about politics for a phase or about the daily news, like how I would consume it before, because I came to the conclusion of like, why does it matter anyways?
Yeah.
Like, what are we going to accomplish regardless? Or like falling into the trap of like the nihilism, existentialism, absurdism question. And it's like, why does this matter anyways? Like, we're not, oh no, but we can impact the next generation. I'm sure we can, but with what? Like, if we live a good life, that's what, 75-ish years?
Yeah.
And after that, what?
There's nothing to show for it.
like, why does it end up mattering? And then you start falling into these traps where it's like, wow, I can't even solve this problem. There's deeper problems. And we're talking about superficial level problems.
Exactly.
That really doesn't matter. I think that could be why it makes us lonelier. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think I totally lost my train of thought, but I definitely agree. Like, it's just difficult. Oh, okay, yes. So I was on the phone the other day with, an underclassman. I'm working in finance, and so I've gone through the whole recruiting cycle, internship, and, now lucky enough to be going back to work. And it's a really difficult process, and there's a lot of moving parts and, understanding like what a Wall Street bank does and how many arms of operations they have and how they make money, and it's overwhelming. And so you have to go through interviews and sort of act like you know what you're talking about, but not too much, because the person will be like, you don't know anything about this, you're just a college sophomore. And so I'm talking on the phone with this underclassman, and I'm kind of trying to give them some advice and say how I think they should prepare and how they're doing a great job because they're a freshman and ahead of the curve. And I'm saying you're gonna sit down and you're gonna read about these things, and you're gonna start to understand things, and you're gonna feel good, and then you're gonna understand things, and you're gonna get a little more intelligent. You're gonna start asking a little more intelligent questions, and you're gonna realize how much you don't know and how it goes on. And that's exactly the point. It's like you can like interpolate that example onto so many different things that happen once you start to you get the superficial level, you dig a bit deeper, you start getting really interested in the questions. Like, you brought up the philosophical example, like existentialism, and you're looking really deeply into it. And then you ask sort of like the peeled back question, why are we even talking about this? Why does it even matter? And then you ask those questions enough, and you kind of loop back into going deeper again into the other questions that, it's just all like a loop that just...
It's like the same thing with this, like, well, you fall into the existentialism, and then it's like, what is the meaning of life? Does this even matter in the first place? And then you go into an optimistical point of view that's like, well, let me make the best out of my life. Let me do what I can. And then you fall into those superficial questions again, and it's like, well, maybe I do want to make political change and help the world become better, because that's what I'm here for. Like, it's all these things that's like, it's almost like lying to yourself. I don't know. I don't think I told you this. I think it was somebody else. Must have been talking about it with Abby, but it was pretty funny. With life, it's almost like, whether we like it or not, there's this book, The Denial of Death, and it just like describes what we do with our life to maintain or keep ourselves entertained throughout our life, right? There is love, whether that's family, relationships, friends, etc. There's art, which is like your job, whatever you do, whatever you're passionate about, and then there's religion, like that gives you a sense of meaning. But in reality, all we're doing is we're driving a car, and we know that eventually at some point we're going to crash and we're going to die. But we don't know when that's going to be. So you can be pessimistic about it and just keep on driving and just know like, oh, I'm going to crash anyways and my life will end. So I'm just going to fall asleep at the wheel and we'll see what happens. Or you can say, hey, I don't know when it's going to happen. Let me make the best of it and turn on the radio and sing the song at full blast and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's just like that absurdism, existentialism, nihilism question. And there's a loop. Those three aren't synonyms. Like, it's a philosophical question between all three of those thoughts. But it's the same thing. It's like, well, I'm going to crash anyways. Why am I going to be thinking about these topics? And then it's like, well, maybe I turn on the music and sing along and end up caring about the daily news and try to make the world a better place.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, I think But I think also, like, on that point, I think, like, we're sitting here and, I'm talking about how I think, people aren't, talking about education versus intelligence and how some people just aren't curious and everything. And it's not even from a point of judgment. I genuinely believe not enough people give themselves credit for what they could accomplish. Yeah. And I think people look at certain subjects and they go, oh, I've heard that class is really difficult. I've heard that. It's not difficult, if you really commit the time to, like, understanding these things. Like, I try to tell a lot of people ask what I study, and I tell them, and they go, oh, you must be really good at math. And I'm like, yeah, I was good at math in high school, but I like math. I care about math. I'm interested in it. I sit there and I like to look at it, and, I've always liked to distinguish in my life, and why I think that I tend to be pretty curious about things and how things work is that there's a humongous distinction between knowing things and understanding things. You can know a lot of things, and that's super cool, and I don't blame anyone for knowing a lot of, I don't know, facts or something. You could talk about a lot of things because you know things. But understanding things is like going under the hood, It's like being the mechanic and looking at an engine and being able to point at all the parts and say, that does this, that's the... I don't even know what a car engine looks like, which is, a good example of, like... but, like, people can accomplish and do way more difficult things than they think that they're capable of. It's just you have to make the decision in your mind to say, I'm going to commit to being interested in this. And, like, I'm going to allow myself to be interested in this. And everyone has different priorities of how they want to allocate their time. You only have so many hours in a day. But I think people at large just need to give themselves more credit and believe in the things that they can do, if that makes sense.
Why do you think they don't?
I think it's too easy to not. It's too easy to sit on your phone and look at TikTok. Today it was hilarious. I'm sitting there and our two roommates are playing, NBA 2K, and they're laughing and making jokes and stuff, and I was in a TikTok trance for probably 30 minutes. I didn't look up once. I'm just scrolling video after video, and it's almost like I just woke up from a nap, and I'm like, wow, what just happened? I just think it's too easy to distract ourselves with things that, entertain us easily. And we get distracted by a lot of other things in life. Not even distracted, it's just people's priorities are different, Just because you can do difficult things doesn't mean you will, and doesn't mean you'll commit the time to being able to, like, understand how to solve difficult problems, because you have to learn all this stuff before. Some people like to go out on Tuesday nights. Some people like to read math papers. And, we have both of those students at a school like this. I think it's difficult to commit to doing that thing, but I think too many people don't allow themselves to think that they could do it in their mind, if that makes sense. I think it's... People would look at, say, the kids that study, that are, in philosophy, that are really deep, and they're interested in these really complicated philosophical questions, and they write these long 15-page papers about these things that I don't know what they're even talking about. A lot of people would look at them and say, I could never do that. I could never even understand all that stuff. Well, if you read enough and you were interested enough, you could, because you would take the time to be curious about it and understand it. But, it's easy to say, I could never do that. That's the point. I think it's easy to say, wow, that person's amazing, and that person probably is amazing. But it's very easy to say, I can never do that. This is what I do. I could never do that.
I think the reason it's so easy to say it is because it's so comfortable to say it.
Yeah,
and it's
definitely.
Like, you don't want to put in the work to be able to do that. But with that being said, I think what makes these people so amazing is that they have the discipline or the curiosity or the passion or the intensity to be able to do this every single day, rep after rep after rep. Something I've been thinking about recently. And this has a lot to do with the transition I'm going through in my life from student athlete and undergrad and everything to, like, what I'm going to pursue within the next few months, really. But I was telling George yesterday, I've sucked at editing. And it's okay. Like, this week alone, I woke up at 6 a.m. to go to the gym twice. Then I stayed up until 2:30 a.m. writing essays. Slept in until 10 a.m. And then we got up at 5:30 a.m. to go golf. And then we're recording and drinking on weekdays. Like, my life is literally all over the place. I was just talking about this with Nikos, the Laguna and he's like, dude, it's part of what you go through after being a student athlete. And that's okay. But part of my realization is, it's like, dude, it's not really that crazy to really make it at something. Oh no, but like, it takes a lot of work. Yes, it does. It really does. But think about it this way. I told you about the Alex Hormozy episode with Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, and something that really stuck out to me was, you got to make success inevitable. And it sounds like super like, oh, Instagram influencer, yeah, I'm going to be successful and a businessman. But when you really think about it, he just goes like, look, my podcast, because he has a podcast, my podcast took 6 years to get where it is today. 6 years. And I posted every single week for 6 years. It's the same thing as going to the gym. It's the same thing as gaining an education, etc. Imagine if I told you, I want to go out on the golf course and shoot, I want to break 90, Tate. I'm going to break 90 after playing golf 10 times. No, you're not, bro. No, you're not.
Anyone that's played golf knows that.
Anybody that's played golf, or the same thing with soccer. It's like, well, you know what, Tate? I want to play 31 soccer games, and then I'll commit D1. I think I'll be good enough then. That's not going to happen. So if I post only 31 episodes of Denting, why am I expecting it to blow up? Which I'm not. But it's like, well, I know I have to post 100 times. If the fancy number is post 1,000 Denting episodes, I could post every month, or every other week, or every week, or twice a week, or 3 times a week. The number's still going to be 1,000. How fast I get there is another story.
Yeah.
Same thing with going to the gym. Dude, how are you so strong? How are you benching that? How are you squatting that? How are you running that fast? How is your mile time that quick? Like, all these things. And it's like, well, I just did the same thing every single day without any excuse.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about with education and with passion. It's like, I genuinely think people aren't doing this, and it's not that hard. There really is no secret to success or all these things. Like, what are you doing differently? I'm doing the exact same thing every single day for the rest of my life. With that being said, some people think like, dude, the podcast is so much work. I don't know how you do it. And to me, it's like, I'm not even doing it enough.
Yeah.
Same thing as like when athletes tell me that, it's like, well, I don't know how you do your sport either. It's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And it's sad to see how that can make us lonely. I don't know if you experienced it with soccer, how it made you lonely with friends in middle school and high school, in college, and naturally cuts out a lot of friends. I was telling George, I don't know anything about Greek life at all.
Yeah, same here.
And that's because of soccer. It cuts out a lot, but that's because of the people you're surrounding yourself by and what you want to do in life. And that's just going to keep going and going and going until it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not difficult. I know you, or it is difficult. I know you know this. It's difficult to be a 15, 16-year-old kid when some of your friends are starting to drink and everything, and they invite you to go, do something on a Friday night, but you were planning on going to the field and practicing free kicks or dribbling, doing a drill on some cones. Like, it's not easy to say those things, but if you care enough or you're disciplined enough, and I think there's a distinction between those things.
Really?
I do. I think especially in education, I think you look at very different types of people. I think you look at, there's people in the corporate world, in the academic world, that you have people that are really good at what they do because they're so curious about it, and they just want to understand as much as they can, and so they're just good because they are so curious and they ask the right questions. And then you have people that are just disciplined, and they just, they might not even love it. You talk to people, I know some people that have done banking, and they fucking hate their lives. But they're disciplined enough to get up and do it every day, even though they hate it, They get up and they work hard, and they do a pretty damn good job. And I think that there's definitely a distinction between those two things. Like, one, the curious person probably pops out of bed a lot easier than the disciplined person does. But they still get out of bed at the same time and get to work at the same time. So, I don't know. I think it's an interesting distinction. And you meet these people, and you can see it pretty quickly.
So, in my opinion, I think it's easier to be disciplined when you are passionate and curious about something and interested in it.
Exactly.
Because a lot of people will say, wow, he sacrificed so much in high school. No, I didn't. My social life was playing soccer every single weekend. That's what I wanted to do with my social life. That was me having fun. If for you, having fun was going on dates and going to these parties and drinking at a young age, super cool for you. Nothing against you. But we just had different interests. Yeah. It's not that I'm sacrificing anything. I enjoyed waking up at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. to hit a workout in and then go to school. I genuinely like that. If you enjoyed something else, that's completely fine.
Yeah.
But I think discipline comes from chasing something that you're really interested in. It's not always easy to follow a certain diet and be disciplined with it, but the results you get is what you want. So that's what keeps you going. If there's no interest and passion, I genuinely don't think you can be disciplined.
It's
in all
very
honesty.
I think I would disagree slightly, and I think that it's very difficult to, but I think that I do to some extent agree. It's like the conditional thing where if you're curious about something enough, it's pretty easy to be, quote, disciplined, because what somebody else would define as you being disciplined is you just saying, what do you mean? Like, I love this. Whereas I think some people, and it's more specific examples, but they might, for the last bit of soccer, there's been spells where like I felt burnt out and I was ready to be done. And it's like, you still got to get out of bed and get to practice. Even though I'm not loving it and having a great time, not playing, in and out of injuries, like, you felt this too. Still got to like get up, go to practice, and act like you're there to, get on the field.
Why did you keep doing it?
I think when you have enough external factors, you have for me, a big thing was always, and I never fully appreciated until I got to college, but you look at something like just the investment and time commitment that your parents put into you, look back and it's like, how could I not finish this out? Like they poured their blood, sweat, and tears into me being able to get to an opportunity like this, and that's an external factor. It's a little bit of like disciplined, like assisted discipline. Like it's not like I'm just doing this for me, and I think that's okay. I think that's perfectly okay.
That is perfectly fine, but I still would argue that there's some sort of interest, because honestly, you had me in the first half of like, well, with our careers, and that is a damn good point that I hadn't considered. I was Googling this book that I've mentioned plenty of times on this podcast, Angela Duckworth's Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. Chapter 4 of that book will stick out to me forever. It's titled Interest.
Okay.
It says that you cannot be gritty if you're not interested. Interested in what? I wasn't interested in soccer or becoming a pro soccer player anymore. What are you talking about, Fair? Well, I'm talking about being interested in giving back to your parents. I'm talking about giving them that picture at the end of the year when we graduate that says student athlete on the stole.
Yeah.
Like, that's our interest right there. That's our motivation. That's what keeps us going. That's what we're interested in. I would still argue that because we had interest in the past, the discipline was so easy. It was a lifestyle for us. Like, it was second nature to us. Whereas if you're starting from the beginning and there's no interest, how on earth are you going to do it?
Yeah, I agree. And I think especially in this example, when you talk about soccer, I mean, it's something that we both at one point had a dying passion for. I just wanted to be a professional soccer player when I was 14, and that was that. And if, for anyone who knows me, could not be further from the truth at this current moment. And it just, those things change over time, and that's fine. And I just think, because I think the big difference is you have those external motivators. You want to do this for your parents, or you think that it's just the right thing to do to finish out, or you want to get that scholarship or whatever it might be.
Finish what you started.
Finish what you started. I'm no quitter. But But, like, I would even argue, there's mornings I'm at practice and stuff, and you have kids that want to play pro, and they're very passionate about the game, and they want to learn about the game, and there's some mornings where I'm just there, and I'm just trying to finish practice, man. I'm looking at the coaches, like, when are they going to blow the whistle so I can get to my class and do my assignment that I have? And it's like somebody would look at me and be like, well, you look pretty passionate on the field. Like, you're going into tackles hard. You're getting upset. You're yelling at people, all this. And it's like, yeah, it's not as much like that I just love soccer. I'm just a hyper-competitive person. I just hate losing.
Yep.
And so, I don't know. I think that could almost be a little bit of an argument for the alternative. But
you're still interested in being competitive, though.
It's true.
There you go.
But it's not the sport itself.
It's not the sport itself, but it's the competition.
It's the competition.
That keeps you going.
Which is kind of like an abstract question, I guess, but...
What do you mean?
That you're not interested... we're talking about the game, and you're showing up to practice because it's soccer and whatever, but...
Maybe you're showing up because you like competing, though. Is the point I'm trying to make.
Exactly, which is what I'm saying, is like... Maybe soccer was the medium that you used. Yeah. It was the best way that you were able to express your competitive edge.
Well, dude, it's not that I love editing podcasts. Mm-hmm. If there's something I really don't like... It's editing these little clips and videos. It takes me a long-ass time. And I could care less about these lights and cameras. Mm-hmm. The reason why I started the podcast was because people looked at me weirdly if I was like, hey, let's go get coffee or let's go get lunch. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm like going up to a girl and it's like, hey, would you like to get coffee or like a drink or whatever? Especially when at the time when I started this, I had a girlfriend. Like, I could not do that before. So it's like, well, this is a perfect medium to do it. And I remember I told this to Ago, one of our housemates, and he was like, well, why do you post them if all you care about is this? And it's like, because the more I post them, the more interesting conversations I can have and the more credibility it builds and things like that. And the best thing is, this thing, it's not really like the 31 guests I've had. It's like the 31 multiplied by 5 or 10 or 20 of the friends they have that listen to this, and then I'm friends with them now.
Yeah.
And it's like, if we go out even later tonight or whenever it is tomorrow night, I'm going to run into somebody and they're going to be like, hey, I've seen you. And it's like, well, now you can talk to me.
Yeah.
Like, Nikos, when he was here, he was like, you're the most approachable person I've... There you go.
Thank you, sir.
Like, he's like, you're the most approachable person I've met. Like, anybody can talk to you. And it's because of this. Yeah. And it's my medium to what I'm interested in.
Yeah, entirely. I mean, and I think, like you said, it's a little sad that, there's people do a lot of associating in their minds because we're well-educated people, right? So we've been taught to make associations in our mind, and so when you might ask somebody to get coffee, there's a lot of associations and assumptions that get made about this problem that you're posing, this question that you're asking, and it's sad because on the other side there is a lot of the other motives behind, asking somebody to meet up or get coffee. But even if you were going to ask maybe another person who you weren't, I don't know, maybe just another guy, you would say, hey, can we go get, you want to go get coffee? There would be some guys that would be like, why would you want to go get coffee with me? Like, what could we possibly even talk about? And then there's girls that you might ask that, and they would say, they're going to make some associations in their mind, but some people just want to get to know people, and it's I think that's something that's it's sad that I feel like not as many people want to get to know people.
This is something that's fun about drinking on the podcast that at this point I don't care, and I'm going to say it. I'm not going to name names, but I'm going to say something that I did my freshman year, and if you ask any of them, they'll tell you that it's true. I remember messaging pretty much every girl in our class, women's soccer. Like, hey, we should get lunch or hang out or something just to get to know them.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but that cringy first time we all met, like the boys' class and the men's, like the men's class and the women's class, and we got ice cream and we walked around campus. I organized that with Lily because I was like, we should all hang out, and nothing happened afterwards. So I messaged every single one of them individually, like, hey, we should like hang out at some time. And I did that a couple of times with a few of them, and one of them that, like, I'm friends with one of them. Well, I'm friends with multiple of them, but point being, you know what? I'm gonna say the names and then I'll bleep them out on the episode so that it makes sense
Fair
to
enough.
you. But the bleep is gonna be so funny. But I was like messaging at some point. It's like, we should hang out, whatever. He comes up to me and goes, "You need to stop doing that." And I'm like, "What do you mean? It's just hanging out." And she's like, "No, it's like you're hitting on her." And I'm like, "I'm not. Like, that's not my intention. I just want to hang out and get to know each other."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Well, it's not coming off as that." And this was before the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the case now?
It's difficult because at the same time, you know, you have to obviously respect people's boundaries, and it's, there's a lot of people. We live in an incredibly crazy world, and I totally understand that it might be weird because people, there's a lot of wacky people out there that have weird motivations and things. I don't even know.
I don't blame them.
Yeah, I don't blame them, but it is a bit sad that people are so apprehensive to just conversation, and that immediately the mind makes so many linkages to some final conclusion of like, what's this person's motives? When you could just be saying, let's go grab a coffee. When we were all hanging out in a group, you said something that I found really interesting. I'd be interested in like talking to you more about that. That's a pretty normal thing. It should be normal.
Did I say that?
What?
That specifically? Or when somebody says something interesting?
No, I'm just saying, like, when somebody says something interesting and you might say, you brought that up.
Yeah.
That's something, like, I'm interested in as well. Maybe we should, like, would you be down to get coffee?
Yeah.
And we could talk about that. And that's part of the thing where you talk about educated versus intelligent or passionate. And if you're passionate about something and you get that sense of loneliness of, like, I don't have anybody to share this with, like,
exactly.
And then you meet somebody who you see a spark that shares the same sort of passion, and you just immediately feel a sense of like, oh my God, I want to get to know you more. And then that's when people might be apprehensive and say, whoa, I don't like know you that much, or make linkages of like, what are your motivations here? But it's just, it's like a natural, it's almost like a natural just attraction of like thought. You see it in somebody else and you just want to engage.
So I asked you if I said that because I was like, did I literally say that in a group? Because, again, I'm not going to name names, but you know exactly who I'm talking about. Same team where it's like, I was talking to her in a group and it's like, dude, that sounds super interesting. The difference here is, she's the exact same way, and I'm like, let's get coffee. And she was like, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're into the exact same things, and it just makes sense. When you meet people that are like that and that are lonely in the same way, like, it just adds up and it makes sense. But otherwise, that's not really the case. Or maybe they are educated in that way, but they're just not used to other people being like that. Another girl that's in our class in women's soccer, I can say her name because she's been on the podcast and it's somebody else, but Angelina Anderson. Like, when we were talking here at the end of the podcast, maybe I'll include the clip right here.
So this was awesome. I was not expecting it to be so deep and reflective and like such a conversation like this. And I feel like I learned so much about you, my friend that I've known for years, but we haven't ever gotten to this level before.
But she says, like, we've been friends for this long and we've never had this good of a conversation. That's exactly why I started this thing. Like, I remember when we finished the episode and I was talking to her, like, the best thing about a podcast is that we have headphones and we're speaking into microphones, meaning that we can only hear our voices. We're so focused on the conversation. And when was the last time you had this long of a conversation with someone that isn't your partner without checking your phone? When's the last time? And she checks her phone as soon as we're done. It was like 2 hours or 2.5 hours, whatever it was. And she had text from her boyfriend, like, are you okay? Are you good? And I get it. Like, it's weird. If it were a different context, like let's say it's a girl that has a boyfriend, not her specifically, just anyone, and she's getting coffee with a guy, and it's been 2.5 hours, Even if it was flipped and if it was
Yeah.
my girlfriend, I'd be like, dude, what the fuck is going
Yeah,
on?
exactly.
But the podcast, again, the context of if you see people doing
Yeah.
it at a coffee shop, it's like, what the hell is going on? Oh, it was a podcast. Oh, it's completely fine then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. It's no, but I think also another thing that's really beautiful, kind of about when you see somebody who, it's usually like a finally moment in your head when you see somebody that shares a similar interest as you do. You kind of, like, there's community to be found in the trenches of topics.
Yeah.
In whatever you're interested in. If it's music, if it's philosophy, if it's math, if it's engineering, whatever your interests and passions are, it becomes lonely when you become maybe curious enough about something and maybe educated. So we'll stick with educated. If you're educated enough about something, it might become a bit lonely, but when you find others, you get a sense of community. When you have an outlet that you can bounce things off of and receive, it starts making you think of questions that your own mind, because, you can only think of so much. You start having to answer questions that another curious individual is having about these things, and you can sit and say, oh, wow, I never thought about it like that. Or maybe they have a question and you understand something about it and you have to explain it to them. And as you explain it, you understand it even better. It's like the studying example. Like, you should try to explain something like you're trying to explain it to a fifth grader. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, and I think that's an interesting way of, you can find that community in these things, but it is lonely because you can't just at all hours of the day hit up this person and be like, I'm trying to fall asleep and I'm thinking about
Yeah.
whatever.
I think the podcast, the reason I love doing it so much is because it allows me to tie a bridge or make a bridge, form a bridge through the podcast between somebody that's really curious about something and somebody that really enjoys conversation.
Yeah.
With somebody that's just like willing to have a conversation about themselves under the context of there's 3 cameras, 2 lights, 2 mics, and a headphone set ready to go.
Yeah.
I think that allows for it, and I think that's why I genuinely love it. That's why I really enjoy it, because if it's not under this context, it'd be weird
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, yeah, it's the perfect example. It's like the one you brought up where you have 2 people fighting in the street, put a ring around them. It's a different, it's a different context. But it is nice to be able to sit and really engage intellectually and, talk about, you have topics in mind. Like, we have this topic right now and you got to sit here and think about this and engage in it. It's a nice refresher from, I don't know, something like TikTok.
Yeah. And I think to that point about TikTok, something that really wakes me up is, again, it's funny, what wakes me up from a TikTok is seeing a TikTok that says, imagine life as if it were a movie and you were the main character. Would the main character be sitting on his couch scrolling through TikTok? Or would he be doing something about his life and making a difference or doing something cool and badass? That, like, the movie would be more entertaining if you're doing something badass. So that's what gets you off your phone.
Yeah.
Something we were doing today. 2 things we've actually done today that I really have enjoyed. We're golfing in the morning and podcasting right now at night because I'm not on my phone.
Yeah.
The happiest times of my life come when I'm not on my phone. That could be when I'm golfing, when I'm podcasting, when I'm watching a movie, when I'm having a conversation over dinner, anything. When I'm reading, when I'm studying, anything. When I'm not on my phone is when I'm happiest. Does that mean don't go on your phone? No, your phone is a tool that you should use. You can't avoid it. You can't sell your phone and not have one.
Yeah.
Like, to not have one and to not use it is to put yourself at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
But when you're addicted to it and you can't stop scrolling, that's an issue. And I think partially that makes us less passionate, less educated, and less connected to each other. And it's all intertwined, I feel like.
Yeah. I agree. It's so nice. This morning is an amazing example, If whether you like golf or whether you like hiking, if you can have a solid 3-4 hours where you just don't really have a reason to check your phone, just a reason to be engaged in your surroundings and, maybe it's a game, or maybe it's, like golf, or maybe it's nature, like in hiking. It's really nice to feel unplugged and just kind of, it's almost like recharging. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of, it's interesting. It's an interesting question to me because it's so easy to do these things. Go on TikTok, scroll through Instagram, read tweets, but it takes an odd amount out of you, and you almost feel like recharged when you let go of these things, which is interesting because these are always just feeding you. So you would think that they might give you some sort of, I don't even know. It's like, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's odd. I don't even know how to describe it really, but you feel a sense of renewal when you go and spend 4 hours absolutely not even checking your phone.
Tate, I feel like it's way more simple than that. I feel like it's because we're getting our reps in, and I've talked about this a lot with you. But genuinely think about it. The reason social media is bad for us isn't because we are looking at certain content or texting with friends or doing X, Y, and Z. It's because it's taking away our time from doing what we're meant to be doing, from doing what we're passionate about, from becoming more educated, from becoming better. The time I spend on social media is not allowing me to become better at podcasting or whatever topic I'm reading about, or at writing, or in my fitness, or whatever it is that you're into. The reason social media and like technology, as people would say, is bad for you is just because you're addicted to it, in the sense that it's taking away time from what you can actually be passionate about and grow and make a living out of. I think that's the issue, in the same way that TV is an issue, or reading the news is an issue. Anything else can become an issue when it takes away the time from something else. It's not that we don't have the time for it, it's just that we don't prioritize it. I think it's that simple.
Yeah, I would agree.
There we go.
I would agree, definitely.
And I think an issue that stems from that is the next topic, a perfect segue, is just how education makes us lonelier, in the sense that, well, since not that many people are doing this, what can we connect on? Do you know what Pew Research Center is?
Yes.
Okay, so I have it up here. I'm going to show it on the screen for anybody that doesn't know. The Pew Research Center is a nonpartisan American think tank based in Washington, D.C. It provides information to social issues, public opinion, and demographic trends shaping the United States and the world. This is where our two interests meet, actually. This is statistics meeting social issues, pretty much, and the world. And there's a couple of good articles on this, both on family and friends and relationships, as well as with education and partisanship and polarization. This first one says, partisans agree time with family and friends is meaningful and fulfilling. We know that to be true. So what's the issue with this if we know it to be true? Well, let's take a look at what type of people we hang out with. In the next article, it summarizes it, how there's partisan divide over DEI, or in K through 12 education. Why does that stem? Why does that happen in a school district? Think about what people you're surrounded by from the very start. So in politics, there's this gerrymandering, right?
Yeah.
You're familiar with this, as many people are. Why does gerrymandering work? Because we surround ourselves with people that think exactly in the same way we do. And we literally will live in areas where people think the same way that we do, whether we know it or not. And then public education system, we all go to the same schools and we all think the same way, and we keep it going and going and going, and that makes us way more polarized.
Yeah.
And we are divided by our interests. We end up only hanging out with people that we like. There's a New York Times article on it that I'm pulling up right here. A question about friends reveals a lot about class divides. And it goes on to show you friends with college degrees. And you see these graphs right here and what it shows, and how there's voters without a college degree, voters with a college degree, voters with a postgraduate degree. The stats speak for themselves. And it says it right here, as my colleague pointed out, Americans tend to sort themselves geographically by party or ideology, so that like-minded people tend to live near one another. And that stems to if you're living together and you form a family, your kids and their kids are going to go to school together, and then they're going to become friends, and then family friends, and you're just going to keep growing for a generation after another after another. And you think the exact same way because you don't leave your bubble.
Yeah.
That happens with our interests as well, which is why we become lonely. I think that the more specific your interests are, the lonelier you're going to be.
Yeah.
Because the more broader they are, the less educated they are, the more friends you can make. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And it seems like such a difficult issue to combat because how do it's difficult to surround yourself with a healthy balance of people who you might, have all the same interests with or not, or maybe be passionate about different things or not. But like we were talking about earlier, and I know you do as well, I find it really interesting when I can sit down and talk to somebody who's really passionate about stuff that I know absolutely nothing about. Like when we sit and talk and you bring up some of the content creators that you really admire, and I'm honestly really interested to hear you talk about that because I'm curious to know, because you're, one of my best friends, and I'm curious to know what you're interested in. Even though, you might have to explain it to me differently than you would explain to somebody else who does something comparable to what you do. I enjoy sitting there and listening to it. But yeah, I saw this really interesting portrayal of how education looks depending on your level of education. So if you imagine the radius of a circle to be all known information about every different topic, math, statistics, science, all the engineering, the STEMs, philosophy, history, all that stuff. At the center of this circle would be like preschool, elementary school. And then there would be, kind of like another circle a little bigger around that would be, middle school. And then a bigger circle, high school. And then a bigger circle, college. And then you start getting, in college, rather than a perfect circle, you start seeing like a skew. So it might look like that. It's pointing in a particular direction. And then you see master's degree, which basically kind of takes that edge and makes it a little sharper and a little closer to the circumference of like all known things that we know. And then you look at something like a PhD, and that actually pierces the circumference and kind of pushes it out a little bit. And I think it's a cool representation to kind of visualize that sense of loneliness. Like there's all this here, and you might be in that very small percentage of people that has this interest. We don't even have to talk about education. It might be an interest, and it might be very narrow and niche, and you might be kind of trying to dive very deep into it and challenge what you know about it. And it's difficult to do that alone when you can't engage with it engage about it with anybody else. I think it becomes difficult. Yeah.
I was talking to somebody that's a very successful businessman, CEO of a company for multiple decades now. I was telling him about an experience I had with a swimmer. I'll mention him twice on the podcast by the time this is out. Reese Whitley. I bumped into him at Mezzo. I think it was before Pac-12 championships this year. And we were just talking about everything that was going on. And we bumped into each other on a random weekday. I was there to write an essay. And we were both getting breakfast, and we ended up talking for what was an hour-long conversation. And our experiences and our lives are so different. Mm-hmm. And I was telling this guy afterwards, the businessman, I was telling him, like, why did I connect so well with this swimmer? I've had no similar life experiences to him. And he looks at me and just tells me, like, look, let's dissect this. He is a leader in his area of his life. Mm-hmm. You are a leader in your area of your life. You are both lonely to a certain extent and can't necessarily relate to other people in what it is that you're doing. Mm-hmm. Because if you try, like, they just won't be as interested, or they can't explain or express themselves in the same way because some things are at risk. Mm-hmm. And it happens the same way in business. when you're a CEO of a company, you can't tell some of your employees what you're really thinking or feeling, and it would be bad to maybe tell your board of directors that same exact thing, which is why you go to another company CEO, and that's when you have these lunch and dinners and coffee chats, or you go out for a drink. You talk about what you're going through, and whether you're talking about two completely different companies, whether one is in finance and the other one is in content creation, you're still going through very similar things at the very core of it. Yeah. Whether you have a PhD in philosophy or a PhD in psychology, or that's not a good example, but in something else.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Two different topics. The very core of what you're dealing with is similar. And I realized that, and it was like, wow, like, you're right. Maybe that is true. Like, Reese maybe couldn't talk about some things in the same way that I can't talk about some things with my team, whether that's my soccer team, my house, like who I live with, my friends, my family. You never know. Yeah. And it wasn't that deep of a conversation. It wasn't like, oh, a life-changing experience, and I told Reese all of my secrets and he told me his. No, it wasn't that. It was just like we were able to relate in what we were experiencing, but those close to us don't understand.
Yeah.
And to your point of how different education systems are, whether you get a certain degree in a different topic or not, the experience at the core of it is similar. And that's something I enjoy so much about this podcast. A joke I have is that I can't go recording an episode without mentioning her, but the biggest lesson I've learned from Cameron Rogers is it doesn't matter if you're an Olympian, the world leader in your sport, an NCAA champion, you go to the best university in the world, or you're none of that. When you're both under the same path, when you're both determined to do the exact same things or just driven to do something with your life, you're going to share similarities. Maybe it's not the exact same passion and interest, but at the core, it's the same thing.
Definitely. I think that's I really like that example you brought up, the conversation of you and Reese and sharing, and how it's just you take two people in similar positions, entirely different areas of interest or, sport in this example. And the similarities are a lot stronger, I guess, than you would imagine them to be at first glance. Yeah. It's the same sort of struggles.
You'd be surprised because, wow, this kid was going through all these things as a high schooler, and he was such a big name, and he still is to this day, a 3-time national champion, versus a guy that you look up his resume on Calvin Soccer, and it says nothing. But you go through it, and it's like, well, he was born in 2000, I was born in 2001, we go to the exact same university, and we're under the same athletic department, and we're both leaders in our areas. Maybe there's something in common. Maybe there's something that got us both here.
Yeah.
Well, sure, he's a much bigger name than I am, but there's something there that connects us. There's a reason we're both here. And I'd argue that's the case for every single athlete at Cal, which is the beauty of the podcast, being able to learn that, not only on the podcast, but through the listeners and being at a bar, being at Kips, at Raleigh's, or whatever it is. And it's like, wow, we go through the exact same things. I've had people at Kips come up to me and say, well, thank you for posting that about mental health. I've been going through an anorexic period in my life, and that really helped me. Or thank you for posting about that. I've actually had friends that have gone through the exact same thing and have unfortunately ended their life. And it was really a hard thing to see, but it was very helpful to see Elise be on episode 30, being able to talk about that and say, wow, she went through it as well. You'd just be surprised how similar it all is. But again, that's within the athletic department at Cal. When you compare the athletic department at Cal to a D2 or a small D3 school or whatever it is, the life experience is going to be different, let alone a high school athlete or a middle school athlete, which is where the class divide or polarization comes in, just to give that example instead of diving into something else.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest divide. Or even being at Cal, whether you're an athlete or just a regular student, the life experience is going to be different. Not different, not really, but there's differences, and that's where the polarization comes from.
Yeah. And I think even just, there's something to, you brought up the example with Elise, and I think it's a very prevalent and really important example of something like mental health, is when you have conversations about it, and, in this case, publicly, put it out, it sort of makes these things a little bit easier to talk about when you're seeing them. You're seeing repetition, you're seeing people, like the sense that we're bringing up, like there is loneliness in these places that we've been in our lives, in going deep in your field of study, in working hard to get to the places that you want to go in your sport. There's loneliness in these things, but it's important to let other people know that if they're going through those kinds of things, that exists, and it's not in a bad way, that it's not like a unique problem, but there are a lot of people that go through those things, and there's there's beauty and there's comfort to that. You can look to maybe people in positions that are more advanced than you, and you can say, I see this person is feeling what I'm feeling, and I think that's kind of the nice thing about this, is when you have a conversation like you did with Elise, people get to look at that and say, wow, this person's Elise, for example, a gymnast at a, what are they, top number 4 in the country?
They were number 4 in the country, NCAA semifinalist this year. She is the Pac-12 representative at the NCAA Division I SAC. She is Cal's representative at Student Athlete Leadership Team for Pac-12, and she is going to be the president of SAC at Cal.
The list goes on. It's like, all the tournaments that Tiger Woods has won. It's like, you just keep going. She's got a crazy resume, and all those girls are amazing. They're really impressive, and especially with their sport, they're incredible. We've all gone to their events. It's incredible to watch.
It's the only sport that I genuinely look at, and it's like, I could train for that my entire life, and I will never be able to do it.
It's incredible. I'm in awe watching them do the different events, and but I'm sure that there are young girls out there interested in gymnastics that are looking at maybe Elise talking about these things, and it's like, wow, this Cal gymnast is having similar thoughts that I am. It's comforting.
Don't go that far away.
Yeah.
Athletes at Cal, her athletic career has been a struggle because of injuries, but you still look at Elise and it's like, well, she's one of the bigger leaders, if not one of the biggest leaders at Cal, within Cal Athletics. Like, whether people realize it or not, like, she is a really big name on this campus, and it's been amazing we kind of grew together at the same time, and we talk about this often, but she is like a big name on campus, and when you see her being vulnerable about these things, and it's like, wow, like behind those LinkedIn posts or behind all these great accomplishments that you're up to, and how like people are talking great things about you, there was also struggle. Like when she posted that thing of her Achilles. I don't know if you saw that post, but she just posted her Achilles scar and a caption talking about it. I remember seeing comments on that post that just said, "Thank you so much for sharing this." From people that I know she's not friends with, like just athletes at Cal.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you see her doing all these amazing things, and then you realize, wow, she's going through the exact same things that I may be going through. And she still managed to do that. Or that's just what unites us at Cal. I don't know. You never know.
It's motivating. It's motivating for sure, because you look at somebody like that and you say, geez, I got to take a look in the mirror and, make sure I'm doing everything I can, because, there's no reason not to.
So there is that imposter syndrome, but then it's also like, we're talking about loneliness and how we experience it, and maybe somebody listens to it and it's like, well, I'm experiencing that too. And it's like, wow, like we're all together and being lonely, which is very funny to say. It sounds funny, but it's the truth. Like, we all go through the exact same things. And does it mean we're lonely and we don't have friends? No, it doesn't mean that. We have plenty of friends. It just means like you can't always share the exact same topics, or maybe people think I have these conversations every single day. I had this person once. I once placed an order online not online, over the phone, back home. And somebody picked up. I had no clue who was picking up. And they're like, Fernando. And I'm like, who is this? And it was like some girl that went to the sister high school I went to.
Okay.
And she's like, well, you just post videos of you talking every single day, so I know what you sound like. And I'm like, well, I don't talk every day. Like, the process even of a podcast, it's super lonely. And people don't realize that. Like, people think I'm just talking 24/7. The majority of the time, I'm editing in this room so that these videos come out. And then I can post them. Like, the least amount of time spent on podcasting is the actual talking and the conversation. It's the research, it's the setup, which you experienced a bit about right now. It's the breaking down, it's the editing, which is the longest part, and then I post it. The least amount of time I spend on podcasting is on actually talking, and I don't know. It's lonely to a certain extent, and that's not bad. But I think admitting that we're not picture perfect all the time, and that we're not having these great conversations all the time, and that we're not perfect all the time. Like, we may post about or portray, or when even not social media, just saying, how have you been?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been good. I'm moving to New York. I'm super excited about it. That's not your entire life.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm super good. I'm going to do a master's in journalism at UC Berkeley, and I'm super stoked about it. That's not my entire life either, man.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much more behind that, and I think admitting how lonely the process is can only unite us even more within that loneliness. And it's not going to take it away because it's part of the beauty. But I think that the more you're interested in something, the higher level you are, and just to use business as an example, like when you're the CEO, you're lonely at the top until you find out that the top isn't very lonely when you hang out with other CEOs, for example. Whereas if you're like starting off at the bottom and you're just one of many employees, you're not going to be as lonely.
Yeah.
But when you start building these habits that make you get there, that's when it becomes lonely. There's a reason there's only one CEO and plenty of employees, and it's the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
I have lost count of how many times I had to reset my alarm whenever I finished the automatic 5-minute timer I set for Facebook every time I open it. I simply can't stop. I just have to scroll. I just needed to see what's next. Without noticing it, my 5 minutes turns to almost an hour of almost mindless scrolling. I think we've all been there. It's unbelievable how I just get lost video after video from one meme to another, and finally to some other posts the site thinks I'm even remotely interested in. Too bad for me and for you, it doesn't stop there. It's a never-ending loop that jolts our brain of dopamine it desires while feeding the algorithm more and more stuff to recommend us on the next loop. Although I committed to not using social media or not as much anymore, I find it hard to refrain from it now amidst the pandemic and all the calamities that we are going through this year. It appears to be the only efficient way for me to get to know what's going on with my loved ones and with the outside world. While I don't discount the good these networking sites have done to the world, it's crazy in the name of eyeballs and metrics. They've become so much better at capitalizing our attention, mostly in a negative way. If you are reading this, I bet, if not admittedly, deep inside, you know there is some truth to it. That social media is making us dumber without even realizing it. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And like it said, like if you're reading this, if you listen to this, you know it to be true. And we've talked about this, and I mean, I wanted to read it on the spot because of what could come up. Time has another one. Nope, did not mean to do that. Here, we'll go to this one. Pretty interesting. I don't know what the 4 reasons are from American Express, but it says, all right, yeah, social media hurts your short-term memory. Social media makes you more susceptible to peer pressure. Social media hurts your confidence and self-esteem. Social media subverts critical thinking.
It's my favorite point.
That one?
Yeah, the 4th one.
Why?
I think that is the most dangerous. I just think, I don't even know. Let me read.
Let's read it.
Yeah,
do you want to read it? Let's stick with the 4th one, and we'll work our way up to number 1. To the 4th point, dude, I've seen this argument from many people. Some people say social media subverts critical thinking. What difference does it make whether you're reading something or an opinion on social media versus reading it in a book? It's the same thing.
Yeah.
You're subverting your own critical thinking.
It's an interesting argument.
We give it more credibility under the context and circumstance that we assume that an author is smarter. Why? Just because they could expand on their point, or because it sold? Oh, because it sold? Oh, so more people agree with it.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing as a video getting a lot of views and likes. That gives it credibility, right?
Yeah.
Well, does it? You see a lot of bullshit on social media with a lot of likes. That doesn't give it credibility.
Yeah.
So what's the difference with being on the New York Times top selling list, especially when, if you really look into it, people don't want you to know this, but if you really look into the New York Times list, there is interest there, and it's based off of how many books are sold. Whoa, people don't know that some authors buy their own books in a big bunch just so they're on that list so they can then sell more. People don't know that, but it's true. If you really look into it, listen to authors talk about it. A lot of people do that.
Yeah.
You're buying your own credibility. It's like buying your own blue check mark on Instagram now or on Twitter.
Yeah.
You're paying a subscription to be doing that. And I don't know if you saw this. Let's actually look it up. Let's fact check how much Instagram made. How much did Instagram make off of blue check marks?
Do you have to pay for a blue check?
Dude, the subscription is $15 now a month.
No.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't see how many people have blue check marks now? That's why.
I did not know.
Yeah.
Really? So okay, I thought that you used to apply for it and they would grant it to you.
A month ago it changed.
A month? Oh, okay.
Like a month ago this time, and we're April 14th right now.
Wow.
All right, let's see if our Wi-Fi is going to help us. Jeez. Come on. Yeah, so the way it works now, I think you have to pay $14.99 a month to be able to get it. I've heard from some people that have gotten it recently. I won't name names, but athletes at Cal that, due to their respect, have a decent amount of following, say that they did get it on their own and they don't have to pay.
Yeah.
And you see famous people that already had the blue check mark, and they say, like, if they want to take it away, that's fine, but I'm not going to pay. And then you see other people with 500 followers.
With
a blue check mark. I'm not going to say names, but that's where it stems from, and that's where it comes from. And it's
interesting.
It's something that happened with Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter started that. Oh,
yeah.
There we go. It's been reported that Instagram sold 44 million blue verification checks in one day at $15 a month, making them a whopping $660 million in just 24 hours.
Wow.
People want to buy their own credibility. That's how bad people want to be something they're not.
It's interesting.
And we believe it just because they're willing to pay for it, in the same way that authors are willing to buy their own books just to hit a New York Times bestseller list. So, question is, American Express, social media subverts critical thinking. Why? It's the same thing as reading a book, isn't it? Just so you know, I don't agree with what I just said. I'm just bringing it up for conversation.
Exactly. I'm trying to think about it. It's a really interesting. I think it's a pretty valid counter argument, but again, you put it in different context. Is there a difference between, what my friend's aunt says and a PhD from Harvard says about the same topic? One of the points that I loved was, during the pandemic, you heard a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, I've done my own research on this," and I'm thinking, do you have like a PhD in virology, or what kind of research are we talking about?
Are we talking about the type of research that you did on Google, or are we talking about the type of research that you've been studying your ass off 24/7, quite literally in the pandemic, to get the job done?
Yeah.
And with what education previous to that?
And that's just one example. But, I think it's an interesting point. I think the context is very valid to say, what do we mean here? What's the difference between a tweet and a quote from a book written by Mark Twain? I don't know.
Especially at that time. No Google. know nothing to
Yeah.
be educated on. Now, some of these people, it's not that they're more educated than Mark Twain, but they have more access to information than he did at the time.
It's true.
So what's the difference?
It's very interesting.
I think, to counter my own argument, that the difference is that if we look at books that are very old, we keep reading them. The reason we read old books in school is because they've survived the passage of time. What does that mean? That if it's worked for the past 2,000 years, it's going to keep on working, rather than a book that was released this year that's very popular at this time for whatever reason it may be. Maybe it's just popular because the author bought his own books and is selling them in his bookstore. You don't know. With that being said, let's take a look at... Oh my God, you were talking about the losing your train of thought. I was going to bring something... Oh, Good Will Hunting.
Yes.
Let's look at Good Will Hunting. He doesn't have a single degree. Why should we listen to him? Oh, actually, he's very smart and he's proving his point without any degree. Oh, okay. So you don't need a degree in that credibility. So are we going to listen to whatever somebody's saying on a TikTok that got 0 views to a TikTok that got 25.2 million views? Are we going to listen to an essay written by a college student or a master's degree or a PhD student that was read by nobody versus a New York Times best-selling book that's at #1 for 5 consecutive weeks? Or are we going to be more interested in a shirt from Gap that didn't cost much money, but it's a cool, comfortable shirt, versus a kid that bought the shirt from Louis Vuitton and it has a little LV design on it and a logo on it that makes it be worth $1,500? Where is the credibility? Is it just because of the degree, because of the price tag, because of the views, because of the best-selling list? Is that what makes something credible? Because if it makes it credible, then a blue check mark next to your name after paying $14.99 a month is the exact same thing. You're buying your own credibility when you should be earning it. Is social media...
Yeah, so then how do you earn... How else do you earn... You know, how do you earn the respect of... You know, how do you have a respectable opinion? You know, you would sit there and think, you know, somebody might, you might be in a debate with somebody, and maybe, you're talking about some advanced topic, and you might have an opinion, and somebody might say, well, who are you to say that? I studied this at this university. Like, what? How do you quote earn credibility?
And if being so passionate and educated is lonely, and credibility is earned by popularity in the masses, is credibility now going to the uneducated that are the least amount of people? Just because it's popular? It's a good question to ask. Like, many people think that just because a lot of people believe in something, it means it's right. When in reality, no, you have to prove it. How do you prove it? You have to get others to agree to it. It's an entire shit show of a cycle, what we're talking about right now with credibility, but
yeah,
when you really think about it, just because some people agree or give you a Nobel Prize... Example, actually, the reason I got into just reading about the philosophy behind quantum physics was because there was a certain rule, and I'm not going to sit here acting as if I can explain quantum physics. I'm not going to act. But there was a Nobel Prize on physics. What was it on? The subject? What? Here, let's look it up.
Was this the very recent one?
Let's see. It was one about... was it this one?
Because I think somebody won one very recently that was a big breakthrough in physics research, if I remember correctly.
Yes, it was really about... It like changed the way people perceive things about...
It's like quantum entanglement, right? It's like something
It's
behaves, something only behaves when you observe it.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
So that's what the basis of it was. Yeah, it's actually right here. Let me see if it reloads. I think the Google search or Wi-Fi is slower if I'm sharing my screen, maybe. Let me see. Nobel Prize quantum physics. All right, let's see. Nobel Prize quantum physics entanglement. It's like how it behaves based on another. Yeah, I'm not gonna try to explain it. I'm not gonna pretend at all.
That's a Chat GPT question.
Yeah, yes and no. Yes, a quantum relationship between two particles that can exist over long distances. That's exactly what it was on. Yeah, so this is what I'm referencing. Point being, it was a breakthrough thing. The only thing I'm trying to get out of this is people didn't believe in it because it wasn't proven before. And now that it's proven, it changes a train of thought. But this is from decades old. And this is, let's see, simple explanation. In case, Jesus, this kind of sucks. How it's not showing. Oh well, it is what it is. You get the gist of it. The point I'm trying to make is, just because somebody said it and wasn't able to prove it before, and now they are, it makes a humongous difference.
Yeah.
We look at something as simple as looking at physics, the breakthrough Isaac Newton moment of gravity, and now it's a simple experiment. Now it's obvious. But when it's breakthrough in the moment, it makes you question things. And the reason change is so hard to deal with is because it redefines the past. It makes you rethink everything, whether that is losing friends or going through a breakup or just finding a breakthrough quantum physics research moment, like that wins a Nobel Prize. Like, it redefines the past. It makes you think, well, were the past quantum physicists wrong? Were they lying about everything else? Oh, we broke up. Did he not love me in the first place? Oh, we're not friends anymore. Was he just using me? No. No, it doesn't. It just redefines the past when it really shouldn't. It's just going back to the frames thing. We're at different frames, different pictures, and every time, and it's just a video playing along. And like I said, I mean, I know nothing about physics to be explaining it, but the point is, it was a breakthrough moment that redefined how we understand the matter around us.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean the guys before us were necessarily wrong. They just had a different capacity or different access to information.
Yeah.
Simple as it gets. And that goes to show, I think I was trying to tie that with the books that have been along for such a long time. If Meditations by Marcus Aurelius has been around for 2,000 years, that's probably because some of the things that he says make sense to us. If a book has been around for 6 months and it's on the bestseller list because people right now like the topic, doesn't mean much.
Yeah. So there's almost a time component to the value of credibility.
You know what? Let's ask ChatGPT. New chat. We're going to start a new chat. Let's see. How do I build credibility? How do I build credibility, ChatGPT? Let's see what it says. No, I have to reload it.
I was having issues with ChatGPT the other day. This might be a them issue.
No, it's so it happens to me when I haven't been using it recently, so I just leave it open after a few hours. Yeah, and especially with the sharing of the screen. But it's a good question, like, how do we build credibility in whatever it is that we're doing? Because if social media is making us lonelier and we tend to listen to people with a blue check mark or people that are famous, are we just going to trust somebody because they have a huge following? Does that make them credible? I know a lot of dumbass people with a huge following. Some of the things they're saying, I wouldn't listen to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to talk about, after this, because it's not loading, I was going to talk about how there are things that unite us all, and it doesn't make us education lonelier, like sports and being a fan of sports and all that, but I think we're being a bit repetitive at this point, and it's a good place to cut it off. I think that's what's cool about sports. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you see billionaire owners and then fans that are just saving up during the week to be able to make it to the game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the type of thing that unites us, because sports is like such a general topic. Maybe athletes aren't friends with anyone,
Mm-hmm.
pro athletes, and the owners aren't, but there's so many fans. And
Yeah.
that's where you unite and you're able to express yourselves and things like that. But I think we made our point clear. Don't you think?
I think we attacked it from a whole different variety of angles.
I think it was a fun conversation. I had a great time.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, and
Always.
I think like being serious and not going and talking about quantum physics or whatever ChatGPT says or things like that. Like, in all honesty, I think whenever you're really interested in something,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be lonely about it,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to focus on yourself to be able to create something and build something and make something out of nothing. You have to
Mm-hmm.
work on yourself and spend time grinding to create whatever it is you're into. You're going to find many people that are on the same path.
Mm-hmm.
Are most people on it? No. That's what makes it special. But when you're able to enjoy the loneliness of what we call education, which is really just interest and passion, when you're able to enjoy that and become the best version of yourself, I think you'd be surprised at how many people are going through the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
and how many better relationships you're going to find because of it.
Mm-hmm. And to the point you made with Reese, it might look a lot different, at first glance, but it's really the same, There's the person on the soccer team out there, and, they're trying to perfect their free kick, and they got to spend a few hours out there getting it right until they get it right. And then there's the student who's in his, master's level math class, who's trying to learn how to solve this kind of problem, and it's giving him a headache. Whether he likes it or not, or whether she likes it or not, he's got to spend a lot of time solving that problem.
Huh?
It just is the reality.
I talked about that with Ugo on the podcast episode 29. It was just, I remember being with a friend, a regular student friend, finals week, and I would see her get up at 5 a.m. every single day to grind out her studies. And I looked at her and it's like, you're approaching your studies with the same intensity that I approach soccer, and then I know a lot of athletes approach their own sport.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes it great.
Yeah.
That's what makes it lonely as well, because most people aren't willing to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're able to grow in that path and end up in a place like Berkeley because of those results,
Mm-hmm.
then you'll find like-minded people. And the circle will keep getting smaller and smaller, even within Berkeley, even after Berkeley.
Yeah.
But I think there's beauty in limiting your friends. Because if you're friends with everyone, you're friends with no one.
Yeah.
And if you just have a handful of friends, that's who you can really count on and who you can really relate to and talk about these things with. So, yeah. Great time. Great conversation.
Good times.
Tate Dolan, a pleasure. Hopefully we can continue to do this.
Yeah.
How long do you think we talked for? Don't check your clock.
I honestly haven't even interpreted it, so I would guess I'd say just over 2 hours.
It's solid 2-hour conversation.
2 hour conversation.
2-hour conversation. No phone, no anything. For those that don't know, Friday night. Why night? Cheers.
Why not? Cheers.
And yeah, 10:46 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty decent pregame, so we'll see what the night has in
Yeah.
store. And yeah, like I said, a pleasure. Hopefully we can do it a few more times before we graduate in a month, which is bizarre to think of.
Very.
We'll make the best of it for now. We'll try to not be too lonely in our education, but we'll take these lessons with us wherever we go.
Indeed. Yeah. Would love to do this a few more times. Maybe, this is all practice, especially for me. I'm not used to being on the in the whole setup, but it's fun. It's a good time in here.
Hey, you're welcome anytime. But for now, for anyone that watched on YouTube or listened on Spotify, thank you guys so much. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're on Spotify, please follow the podcast. That's it for today. I'll see you guys next time.